13 bodies were discovered in a suburban home located in Kent, Washington in the year of 1992. The story I'm about to tell you is a simplified version of the documents I am in possession of. I discovered these documents while going through my adoptive father's file cabinet 2 weeks after his funeral. He was the lead investigator for the entire King County's Homicide Division. October 6th, 1992, 10:48 p.m. 2 Kent police officers responded to a complaint about screams and horrific smells coming from their neighbor's house. The first thing they noticed were the wind chimes that decorated the front porch. The ornaments were compiled of what looked like chicken bones that hung from a string and formed into an odd decorative fashion. The house stood 2 stories high. It was painted a faded light blue, chipped away revealing the rotted wood underneath. The lawn was unkept with a small tree planted in its front yard that long withered and died away. There were 3 stone steps that led to the porch that stretched across the front side of the house. Officer Brooks and Officer Ramirez knocked on the door promptly. After roughly 30 seconds, they followed with another louder knock, which created enough force to push the door ajar. "Kent Police!" one of the officers shouted. When there was no reply, both of them withdrew their flashlights and proceeded through the threshold of the broken door. A putrid odor welcomed them as they shined their lights throughout the room, making both of them gag. 3 lifeless bodies, cold, pale and gray, laid in a uniform line on the living room floor. Body number 1 was a middle-aged man. The man suffered from what looked like a blunt object to the head, causing his skull to be partially caved in. Body number 2 was a woman, about the same age. Approximately 8 stab wounds covered the woman's face, neck, and torso. Her shirt was slightly raised, exposing a few inches of her lower stomach. What was easily visible were 1/4-inch deep claw marks, possibly human, that seemed to stretch beyond the length of her shirt. Body number 3 was a teenage girl in her late teens. No visible signs of death, other than the lifeless expression of terror on the girl's face. All 3 victims rested in a pool of coagulated blood. Both of the officers withdrew their weapons from their holsters, and one of them radioed in for backup and medical. Embracing their curiosity, they continued to explore the remainder of the house in search of survivors. Ramirez stepped over the line that separated the hardwood floor from the kitchen tile. A light squish rose from the ground and traveled towards the officer's ears. He shined his light downward towards the ground and saw a small pool of blood beneath his boot. Lifting his boot to see what he stepped in, a flattened eyeball stuck between the grip of the bottom of his boot. The man nearly vomited at the horrific sight, attempting to scrape the remnants of the crushed eye on the edging of the floor. Brooks proceeded to shine his light around the kitchen. The walls were painted with blood, curtains drawn. The back porch light shined through the curtains, revealing what they were made of. A light peach-colored leather type of material, neatly sewn and hung above the window. Further examination revealed that it was made of human skin. A serrated knife rested at the bottom of the kitchen sink, covered in blood and the remnants of flesh. Alongside that were several dirty dishes, covered in the same rotted remains, partnered with the other loose eyeball. Opening the refrigerator door, an even more pungent odor forced its way into the thin air, causing the officer to regurgitate his late dinner all over the kitchen tile. His eyes widened as he examined the contents of the fridge. Rotten limbs, those of which seemed to add up to the amount of a full corpse. 2 legs, each sliced in half at the knee, the arms severed at the shoulder, a torso which had its ribs protruding from the decayed skin, and several food storage containers full of what looked like entrails and organs of the corpse. On the top shelf, at the very back of the fridge, stood a male human head with both eyes missing. Maggots wiggled and crawled through the opening of the severed head, its face contorted into an undefinable expression. Officer Brooks then slammed the door shut as quick as he possibly could, followed by another radio on the status of their backup. ETA was about another 30 minutes due to their location. He staggered back in awe as he retreated from the kitchen towards the hallway. He then bumped into his companion, who was now using the end of his combat knife to pick the remainder of goo from his boot. Body count 4. A minute or so passes by, and Ramirez looked up to see the horror painted across his partner's face. After a bit of consolation and inspirational words, he was pulled out of shock, and they both proceeded onwards. Each of their guns drawn, they slowly stepped down the hallway. The floor creaked loudly underneath each time their boots made contact with the wood. The walls of the hallway were decorated in empty picture frames of all shapes and sizes. It was as if someone came through and removed each picture from the glass of the frame and discarded them without any regard. It gave off the most ominous feeling imaginable as they approached a closed bedroom door. Ramirez pressed his ear up against the door as he heard the light sound of oldies music emitting from behind the closed wooden door. He asked Brooks to cover him as he turned the knob and slowly pushed it open. The light overhead flickered, allowing brief shots of the interior of the bedroom. The horrors of the bedroom revealed itself in the flickers of light, as if flipping through photographs in a book. A bed sat in the middle of the room. On it was the corpse of a young woman, with each limb tied to the bed frame. She was completely nude. Her lower torso was gaped open and fully exposed inside of her uterus. It was empty. Blood and amniotic fluid soaked the sheetless mattress. On the wall to her left were words painted in blood that read, "It's a boy." Ramirez lowers his gun, as well as his jaw, as he was just frozen in place. He could feel the bile rising up from his stomach, and he swallowed it down hard. He then retreated from the room and gently closed the door behind him. In the hallway, Brooks was in a panic attempt to get in contact with dispatch. There seemed to be no response, as both of the officers repeatedly attempted to radio into them. The response they got in return was only static. "I don't know what to think of this. I've been on the force for 15 years, and never once have I experienced something of this caliber," muttered Brooks as he fiddled with the cord to his radio. "I'm starting to feel sick. What kind of twisted fucks would do something like this?" shouted Ramirez as he leaned his head forward on the wall of the hallway. "Let's go. We need to make sure there aren't any more survivors. We can't back out now," responded Brooks as he put his hand on the shoulder of his now sobbing partner. Ramirez let out a deep sigh and wiped the salty tears from his eyes. "You're right. We need to keep going," he muttered weakly. The officers turned to the adjacent room and opened the door. The room was lit by the blue screen of an old television. The light illuminated the king-size bed across from it. Now covering their faces with their shirt, Ramirez and Brooks feasted their eyes upon the gluttonous sight. A very obese man laid on his back with his head propped up on the backboard. The man was covered in boils, and pus oozed from each one of them. Surrounding him were remnants of what looked like human bones, and blood stained on the sheets of the sunken bed. At this point, Ramirez's stomach gave way, and he also ejected the contents of his stomach all over the floor. Brooks stepped forward and shined his light on the man. His face was scrunched together, his eyelids barely visible due to the folds of his forehead. A foul odor emitted from his corpse as Brooks choked as it passed through the defenses of his uniform, shielded nose. Both officers retreated from the bedroom as quickly as their feet could carry them, slamming the door shut as they stepped into the hallway. At the end of the hall on the far left was another door. Across from that was a set of stairs leading to the upper floor. Ramirez gestured for Brooks to head upstairs, and he'll follow after clearing the next room. This time he swung the door open and pointed his gun with an eager anticipation. a body with what looked like 40 or 50 hypodermic needles protruding from his skin sat on the toilet, wearing nothing but his shoes. His skin was pale green and blue. Ramirez took a few steps closer and lifted the man's head from its slumped forward position to get a good look at his appearance. Ramirez immediately jumped back, in shock at the sight of the dead man's face. Both of his eyes were solid white, no pupil, no iris, just a white marble inside of his eye socket. His face was twisted and morphed into a wicked grin of pleasure. Dark purple veins covered his veins like lines on a map. Body count? 7. Needles crunched underneath Ramirez's boots as he stepped backwards out of the bathroom and turned to head upstairs. Officer Ramirez called after Brooks at the bottom of the stairs, but there was no response. He panicked, bolting up the stairs and immediately through the half-open door to the room to his left. Ramirez ran into the back of Brooks as he stood there hypnotized by the sight in front of him. Confused yet relieved to see his partner still alive, he looked forward. "Why didn't you say anything? I thought you might have been..." His voice came to an immediate halt as he now caught a glimpse of what his partner had been distracted by. There in the room hung 5 little girls, all roughly between the ages of 3 and 5, with rope hugged tightly around their neck. The lifeless corpses swayed from side to side as they suspended from the ceiling. Each of the little girls' long hair masked their faces, and neither of them bothered to take another step forward to get a better look. Body count? 12. "We need to get out of here now!" exclaimed Brooks. He turned around and grabbed his partner by the shoulder. Without saying a word, Ramirez followed as they bolted down the stairs and headed towards the front door. They leaped over the bodies laying in the living room. That's when they heard it. A door they must have missed. They stopped dead in their tracks to get a better listen. The sounds of crying mauled their eardrums as they scrambled for their firearms. It wasn't any ordinary crying though. It was the crying of a baby, a newborn baby. Ramirez flung the door open and bolted down the dark stairs leading to the basement, and Brooks followed closely behind. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, they saw nothing but a bassinet and a woman with long ratty hair. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and in her arms, she caressed and soothed a crying baby boy, wrapped in a blood-soaked blanket. Ramirez withdrew his weapon. "Get police! Put the baby down and get on the ground now!" He screamed at the top of his lungs in absolute fury. The woman ignored his words and continued to soothe the baby. Ramirez took another step closer. Then the woman's head shot up and glared directly at him. Ramirez again repeated himself. Her eyes burned with a sinister fire that one can only withhold in a look of pure hatred. She then gently set the baby down inside the bassinet and withdrew a knife, lunging towards Ramirez. Before he could even react, Brooks fired on the woman, putting 3 bullets in her chest and 1 in her head. Her body fell lifelessly against the basement floor as Ramirez made his way towards the now crying baby in the bassinet. The sounds of police and ambulance sirens rolled in from the distance as the 2 officers made their way to the front porch of the home. Officer Ramirez caressed the small child until they were guaranteed safety. When the paramedic arrived, the 3 of them were transported to the nearest hospital for further examination. Further investigation reveals that the woman in the basement and her husband, the obese man in the bedroom, were the occupants of the home. Their only son, the man in the bathroom, had a very heavy heroin addiction and had apparently been gone for the past several years on a binge. Then he finally returned home when he hit rock bottom and was a witness to the following events. The lady would abduct and drug expecting mothers and harvest their fetuses once they go into labor. She then raised them as her own, living off the flesh of the many victims. Later they discovered an endless hole filled with discarded human bones on their property that stretched about 5 acres into the woods. The girls hanging in the 2nd-story room were the rejected children she raised that acted out against her. Due to the failure of her son, she was determined to have another. The 3 bodies come into play when the family of the abducted mother in the first floor bedroom went vigilante and ended up getting themselves killed. The girl in the living room, her cause of death has yet to be determined. Final body count, 13. The story above was a compiled first-hand testimony of the 2 officers themselves. Officer Brooks later committed suicide after the incident, and Officer Ramirez has been missing for the past 10 years. Amongst the other files and evidence, I found adoption papers stapled to one of the forms. It read my name at the top, and October 6th, that's my birthday. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment. Any feedback is totally welcome. Oh, and please give it a like or dislike. The choice is in your hands. And last but not least, join me.